It is comfortable to imagine eugenics as unique evil born in the chaotic minds of the Third Reich, a pseudoscience practiced exclusively by men in jackboots, marching across Europe. We tell ourselves that the quest to purify the human race was a momentary madness, a foreign barbarism that was defeated in 1945. Yet, this narrative is not only historically illiterate, it is dangerous. The truth is that eugenics was not invented in Berlin, but in the polite drawing rooms of the Victorian England, and it was perfected not in German concentration camps, but in the courtrooms of the United States. Long before it was a tool of genocide, eugenics was considered the cutting edge of progressivism, supported by the presidents, Supreme Court justices, and the most prestigious universities in the world. To understand how the world convinced itself that breeding humans was no different than breeding livestock, we have to look past the horrors of the Holocaust and examine the seduction of the logic itself. The motivations for eugenics can be broken down into two distinct types, and we will examine the machinery of each. We will look at the victims of this science, often poor and voiceless, and we will see how the legacy of this movement quietly persists in the age of genetic engineering. But first, we have to understand the idea, because surprisingly, eugenics was originally pitched not as hate, but as love, a love for a future, perfect humanity. The term eugenics comes from the Greek for good birth. It was coined in 1883 by Francis Galton, a polymath and perhaps unsurprisingly the cousin of Charles Darwin. Galton observed that humanity had spent centuries breeding faster horses and fatter sheep by selecting the best stock and mating them. He simply asked, why do we not do the same for ourselves if talent, intelligence, and health are hereditary? Could we not engineer a society free of disease, free of criminality, and free of poverty, simply by ensuring that the best people procreated? This gave rise to the first arm of the practice, positive eugenics. This is the soft side of the science. It refers to the encouragement of the so-called fit to reproduce. In the early 20th century, this took the form of fitter family contests at state fairs across America. Much like judging pumpkins or prize hogs, doctors would examine rural families, measuring their skulls, testing their reflexes, and judging their lineage. Winners were awarded medals and ribbons celebrated as the biological gold standard of the nation. It was viewed as patriotic duty to breed. However, where there is a fit, there must necessarily be an unfit. This brings us to the second and far more violent type, negative eugenics. This is the systematic prevention of reproduction among those deemed dysgenic or genetically undesirable. And this is where the logic of the farmyard meets the rights of the human being. If you cull the weak sheep to save the flock, what do you do with the weak human? In the early 20th century, the definition of unfit was scientifically codified. It included the epileptic, the alcoholic, the criminal, the blind, and a nebulous, terrifying category known as the feeble-minded. The logic was cold and mathematical. One prominent American researcher tracked a family pseudonymously called the Jukes, arguing that one bad genetic ancestor had cost the state of New York millions of dollars in crime and asylum over generations. The solution, they argued, was not charity, which only allowed the weak to survive and propagate. The solution was sterilization. We tend to associate state-sponsored sterilization with fascism, but the United States led the world in this practice. In 1907, Indiana passed the world's first sterilization law. California followed, performing the procedures on thousands of people in state institutions. In fact, American eugenists were so prolific that their work drew admirers from abroad. In the 1920s, a rising German politician named Adolf Hitler wrote fan mail to American eugenic leaders, called their books his Bible. When the Nazis eventually passed their own sterilization laws in 1933, they didn't write them from scratch, they modeled them on the laws already on the books in California. But to see the true human cost of this called calculus, we do not need to look at a statistic, but at a woman. Her name was Carrie Buck. In 1924, Carrie Buck was an 18-year-old living in Virginia. She was poor, uneducated, and had been placed in Virginia colony for epileptics and feeble-minded. Carrie was not epileptic, and later historians would discover she was likely not feeble-minded at all. She had been committed because she had become pregnant out of wedlock, a pregnancy that was a result of being raped by a relative of her foster family. To hide the family's shame, she was institutionalized. The state of Virginia decided that Carrie Buck was a perfect test case for the new sterilization law. They argued that Carrie was genetically intellectually disabled, that her mother was disabled. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court in 1927. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled against Carrie. The opinion was written by Justice Oliver Wendell, a man often lionized as a progressive legal hero. In his ruling, he wrote one of the most brutal sentences ever in American legal history. It is better for our world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring from crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. He concluded with the infamous line, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Carrie Buck was sterilized. Her sister was sterilized. Over 60,000 Americans followed them, many without their knowledge or consent, during routine surgeries like appendectomies. The tragedy of Carrie Buck is not just that her rights were violated, but the science was a lie. Carrie's daughter, whom the experts labeled an imbecile, made the honor roll in school before dying young of measles. Carrie herself was later interviewed by reporters and found to be perfectly lucid. Intelligent woman who read the newspaper daily, she wasn't unfit, she was just poor. And this reveals the fundamental flaw in the eugenic argument. It masquerades as biology, and it is almost sociology. Out of the population, poverty, criminality, moral looseness are not encoded in a double helix. They are the results of environment, economics, and opportunity. The science of eugenics was simply a way for the powerful to pathologize the powerless. It provided a medical justification for classism and racism. By labeling the poor as genetically defective, society absolved itself of the responsibility to help them. Why fix the slums if the people living in them are biologically broken? After World War II, when the world opened the gates of the death camps and saw the endpoint of eugenic logic, the movement went underground. The Eugenics Society in America changed its name. The journals were rebranded. We stopped talking about the bloodlines and started talking about the medical genetics. But the core question remains unsolved today. We stand on the precipice of a new kind of eugenics, one that is not state-mandated but consumer-driven, with technologies like CRISPR and pre-implantation genetic screening. Wealthy parents can already select embryos for sex and screen out of potential diseases. Soon, we may be able to select for height, muscle mass, or intelligence. We call this liberal eugenics because it is a choice, not a mandate. But the result is strangely similar to Galton's dream, a society where the rich are not just economically superior, but biologically superior. The line between curing a disease and improving a human is thinner than we think. If we could breed a human who is smarter, stronger, and healthier, should we? Or does the act of designing a person strip them of their humanity, turning them from being into a product? Eugenics is based on the idea that we can solve the human condition, that if we just snip the right wires and arrange the right marriages, we can create a paradise. But history suggests that when we try to play gardener with the human population, we don't end up with a garden, we end up with a graveyard. We do not know what the perfect human looks like, and perhaps, given our track record, we shouldn't be the ones to decide. The value of a human life is not found in its utility to the state, nor in the purity of its genes, but in the simple, messy, and uncontrollable fact of its existence.